For this lecture, we'll be looking at IDEA Principle Number 3, or Individualized Education Plans. So our roadmap for this lecture are we will be looking at the confidentiality laws that apply to IEPs, and then we'll be reviewing who's on an IEP team and the different parts of an IEP. So in terms of confidentiality, it's important to know that we are governed by FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974. This applies to any entity that receives federal funds from the Department of Education, and it relates to all student records that are maintained by a school district. This includes health records because they are maintained by an employee of the district, such as a school nurse or health clerk. Another law that is mistakenly applied to IEPs at times is HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. This relates to protected health info. However, it only applies to healthcare providers and does not apply to educational settings. So we are guided by FERPA in terms of maintaining student confidentiality. Within FERPA, the parent can request copies of all their students' records, and a school district must comply with that request within 45 days. In addition, no information about a student from their education records may be shared with anyone not directly working with the student without parent consent. So just a review of who is on a student's IEP team. We're looking at the student, general education teachers, and hopefully it's one of the student, a school system representative such as an administrator. You can also have other related service providers such as transition, parents, others with special expertise about the child, a person who can interpret results such as the school psychologist, and a special education teacher. It's important to remember when you're planning IEPs that you focus on person-centered planning. This is when you're looking at a student's strengths, you're taking into consideration the parent concerns, the results of multiple evaluations and assessments, and from those you create student needs. And it's important to remember that an IEP is a collaborative, living document that can be changed, and it is a fluid document, meaning you can always revisit the decisions that were made during an IEP. So these are the IEP components. 1 are present levels of performance. 2 are goals written to these present levels of performance. 3, a statement of how these goals will be measured. 4, what services the student will receive. 5, how often the student will participate in general education. The dates, frequency, location, and duration of services. All 4 of these must be spelled out in the IEP very explicitly. Once a student turns 16, there must be a transition plan included. This actually needs to be done during the IEP year that they will turn 16, so the student may be 15 when you start a transition plan. There has to be an age of majority statement if the student will be turning 18 before the next IEP meeting, and there also needs to be a statement of when parents will be notified of the student's progress. An individualized family service plan is another type of IEP that is for children that are in Part C of IDEA. These are those children that are between the ages of birth and through age 2 who are receiving services from regional center generally. It is much like an IEP, but it is focused on infants and toddlers. It is more focused on support for the family. It has the same components as an IEP, but generally the services and goals are written to be worked on in a home environment instead of a school environment. The individual transition plan is a piece that must be included before a student turns age 16. It is person-centered, and it's looking at a student's transition from school to community or post-secondary education. The student must be involved in transition planning. It includes post-secondary goals that the student has in terms of living arrangements, career, education, transportation. It can also include some sort of transportation services if the student will be continuing on through age 22. And it also has to have a statement about age of majority rights. So when you're looking at an IEP, the most often litigated areas in an IEP are specific programming, related services, medical services, transportation, counseling, physical therapy, and extended school year. Specific programming means something was specified in the IEP that wasn't given, and so a parent ends up litigating with the district. And we'll talk about this a bit more in class. Related services, there's arguments over what related services are appropriate. Medical services, often parents will feel that a school district should be paying for medical services for their student, and we'll talk about that a bit more in class. Transportation, meaning if a student has to be transported to related services, that's often litigated off campus, or if a student has to go to a school outside of their neighborhood school. Personal counseling services are often litigated because school districts often don't pay for those. Physical therapy services are often litigated because they are considered a medical service. And extended school year relates to summer school. Many parents feel that the school year should extend and the district does not, and so often there are arguments about that. Also, you have to consider assessments within an IEP. These days, students are taking the SBAC test, or the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. That would be for all your mild to moderate students. And then they're also taking district benchmark assessments. And then for all students that can't meet Common Core standards, there is the CAA assessment, which used to be called the CAPA. Now it's the California Alternative Assessment, and that is for students that are using Common Core connector standards, which are a bit different than Common Core. And that should only be 1% of the student population that is taking the CAA assessment. Now, there are lots of accommodations in the SBAC test that are available to students, and these have to be written into their IEP. So students with disabilities can have universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations. Universal tools, as you can see, are available to all students, so those do not have to be included in an IEP. Designated supports are also included for all students, so they don't need to be included in an IEP. However, if specific accommodations are needed by a student, they must be written into their IEP or the student cannot access them during the assessment. This is a list of universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations that students may use on the SBAC assessment. As you can see, the accommodations are for students with more severe accommodation needs. And we will talk about these in class, and there's a tool that I'm going to show you in class to figure out which accommodations would be good for a student. The other factors that are present in an IEP that must be accounted for are behavior. If a student has behaviors which are disruptive to the class setting or to their own educational learning, then a behavior intervention plan must be in place, especially if a restrictive environment is being considered for that student. There must be proof in the IEP that a behavior plan was put into place and attempted before that student is moved into a more restrictive environment. Schools are also supposed to be using PBIS these days, or Positive Behavioral Intervention Supports, to support student behavior. Communication is another area that has to be addressed in an IEP, such as if a student needs sign language or assistive technology in order to communicate. AT or assistive technology also has to be considered, and this would include an evaluation of what the student needs are, who would purchase that material or what funds would be used to purchase those materials for the student, There needs to be a training component on training both the people that work with the students, his or her parents, as well as the student themselves on how to use the technology. And there needs to be some sort of customization or fitting process for the student. There are also considerations for students with visual impairments in an IEP. And then there are language considerations. If a student is a second language learner, what assistance do they need, and what assessments do they need in their primary language that are going to help them be successful in the classroom? So we do need to do a review of the IEP. The first review is done annually. Every year, by the date of the previous IEP, an annual IEP must be met, and you have to discuss whether the student goals were met. And then you have to create either new goals for the student or continue the old ones with revisions. And then every 3 years, a student has a 3-year triennial assessment, which is when all the assessments are given to the student again, the academic and the achievement assessments. You reevaluate the student's needs, and your timeline starts all over again. So that is the due date for your new IEPs from then on. And that's it. Now you can go on to the next one on parent participation.